Hi, this is Lauren Whitehurst with Lab 8 about wood. Lab 8 starts off by giving you 5 mystery samples of wood, and you're supposed to do several different tests on these wood samples to determine what they might be best used for and what's their best properties. Notice the way that the wood is cut can produce several different patterns of grain depending on how it's cut and how the cells grow together. Here's an example of grain and showing the direction of the grain of this wood. So a straight grain is one that is easy to split, so it might be good for firewood. A spiral grain grows up through the course of the trunk and is pretty weak. And an interlock grain is a successive growth of cells in opposite directions, which makes for a strong grained wood. And here we have some statistics, or data essentially, that talk about the cleavability or tensile strength of our different samples and compares them to 3 other trees, the elm, bald cypress, and longleaf pine. Besides grain, the next thing we're going to test on our wood samples is density. So we're going to start by measuring the wood. Sample 1 comes in at approximately 42.2 grams. We then want to put that wood into a beaker filled with water. Before adding the wood, the volume is approximately 600 milliliters. Upon adding the wood, you see it rises nearly an entire 100 milliliters. And that is the next data point you will need. So for example, it was roughly 100 milliliters displaced. So it gained C, about 100 milliliters. D, you want to subtract C from B and divide A by D to get the final density. Luckily, we have slides to look at the structural differences between angiosperms and gymnosperms. This is a cross-section of a pine, and as you can see, those long tapered cells with many nuclei are the tracheids, which you may notice in absence of something. This is a slide of a cross-section of an ash tree, which is an angiosperm. Notice here that there are very large circles, and these are vessel elements that can transport water very effectively throughout the tree. Next, we're going back to our wood samples, and we're going to measure the toughness using a tack. So here are the samples. Here's a tack. This instrument is called a penetrometer. So I'm applying a certain amount of pressure to this tack, which is about 3 pounds of pressure. You want to just gently push down on that until the tack stops. And you can remove your tack. Oh, sorry, while it's still in there, you're going to want to mark it. So you want to mark it with a marker of how far it went into the wood, and then that will be your measurement for how tough the wood is. These stations are meant to test the flexibility of your different samples. Here are some more instructions regarding the materials you need and the instructions for measuring flexibility. We have a clamp here, and essentially we were clamping sticks like these. Clamp one of these boys, the girls, clamp it in until it's tight. And essentially, if you apply an amount of pressure on this, now it's locked, not locked, and it has any bounce back, you want to measure how far did it go down. But this was not working out for us so well, so we were essentially just rating them hand in hand, kind of how flexible are these sticks. and you have 5 different sticks. We've already learned a lot about many things that can make a plant smell. We're going to observe the aroma of some of those different twig samples we had. By doing that, we're going to use sandpaper here to rough up one of these sticks. See, this one's been heavily used today, to try to remove off some of that extra material and release some of the aroma. Here it looks like a pine stem, so that should be pretty odoriferous. So that actually ends the different tests you're going to do on the wood samples. Just want to remind you of the difference between a dicot stem and the stem of a monocot. Also, our famous root tip model, to remind you again where those meristems are. Root and shoot meristems. So rays are essentially what they sound like, little rays of sunshine coming from the center of the tree, and they move solutes in between and laterally throughout the stem. Sapwood and heartwood are really easy to notice here. So the heartwood has been accumulating resins and old waste products. It becomes darker from the lignin and tannins. And the sapwood is on the outer part of that, so it's a lighter color. We have a sample here that's showing heartwood on the left and sapwood on the right. And here's a good description of heartwood. Darker, it's not as good at conducting water anymore. And that sapwood will keep the plant alive and surround the heartwood. For the first introduction on wood, the lecture talks about apical meristems. Remember, these are found in the roots and shoots and the axillary buds and allow the plant to grow taller in these cases, or wider. But eudicots, or woody plants, are able to grow laterally. So they have lateral meristems that increase the width of the stem and the roots. These are responsible for producing the bark, the vascular cambium, and the cork cambium, which are found right beneath the bark and allow for a lot of nutrient transport. Here in the United States, where we have a lot of seasonality, you can really see the difference between growth rings typically. So it has an entire year's worth of growth there. And during the seasons, the tree will grow differently. And typically you can count these rings as a measure of how old the tree is, typically. Once again, monocots lack true wood. So they have vascular bundles that are all scattered throughout the stem. That's not good. Okay. Whereas eudicots or non-monocots have their vascular bundles concentrated on the outside. So wood can develop in that way. With all these resources allocated to the outer part, the cambiums can form and create wood. Here is the cambium itself, formed by different meristematic cells, the lateral meristems, that allow the plant to grow outwardly. So wood is an accumulation of secondary xylem. Here's a good image of the cambium. Just as a reminder, this regards to Station 6, growth rings and resonance. Here's an acorn and a live oak specimen found on campus. Here we have a sample of oak, and as you can see in the center, that's a very dark wood. And I'd like to say that that is the heartwood of this plant, particularly. You can also see the growth rings as well, and the rays. You see those fine lines radiating out to the edges. So this is oak or Quercus. You can see the rays there. And also here is a labeled picture of Quercus wood as a slide. Pine has really distinct growth rings, as you can see. And remember, typically these can be used to estimate the lifespan of the tree and also the living conditions. So if they're extremely clean rings all the way around, it likely had a pretty good, normal, even life. And here we have a pine cut, basically a slice out of it. And we have the heartwood in the middle here and the sapwood out here. Here's a good picture of a pine cross section and also one of a slide, which I'll zoom to. Pine cross section here. Next we're moving up over to some examples of temperate trees. So temperate trees you'd find around here as opposed to tropical. Sweet gum, it does have a sweet smell to it. Okay. And there's a little about it, and here is some of its wood. Let's see. Black walnut is found on campus and is really desirable for furniture. It has these huge citrus looking like fruits that once that outer rind is peeled off will eventually reveal a walnut. And black walnut can be found in many places on campus. It has these very, very distinct compound leaves. Here we have wood from hickory. Here is wood from Prunus serotina, or wild black cherry. This is found on campus very commonly. Laurel cherry, it's often called. Pretty good. Here we have a maple you can find on campus, the Florida maple. And the wood from that can be pretty tough. So, as part of the hard maple groups, which here, notice the sound. That's pretty hard, I'd say. Another plant you'd likely recognize here is juniper or red cedar. Here we have the Douglas fir. Keep in mind you don't have to know all of these. I'm just showing you the samples and the information. You don't need to recognize all these trees. And we're going to talk about pines a little while we focus. Section 4, important timber species. Gymnosperms are softwoods as they have those tracheids that do not have vessels. So the southern pine. Many species of southern pine are used for many different timber products. Pinus ponderosa is a plant you would not find around here, but can get very, very old. Picea, or spruce, is also in the pine family. And slash pine, or Pinus eleoti, is one of the most common pines you will find around campus. It grows really quickly and is harvested really quickly. Now we'll talk a bit about tropical angiosperm hardwoods. This is one from the bean family. And it's, not the bean family, Zygophalaceae instead. And it's very nice, very dense wood. Here we have Shorea, Philippine mahogany, Dipterocarpaceae. Here we have mahogany, which is very highly prized and is the state tree, Belize's national tree. Here we have a plant growing called teak, which is also grown quickly and harvested quickly. And it's actually in the mint family. Here's balsa wood. Listen, sounds like styrofoam. It's in the Malvaceae or hibiscus family. Here we have white ash, or Fraxinus americana, which can be found all over campus. There's a little information about that. A sample of white ash, and some of its fruits. There are dry fruits that have fallen off. Ash is a very hard wood. Here's a really good picture for showing vessels, tracheids, and rays all in one picture. Here's one example of the white oak group. They don't have any bristle tips on their leaves. There's also the red oak group, and some of them do have bristle-tipped leaves. They sound pretty similar. One of the coolest trees, in my opinion, is the cork oak, or Quercus suber, in which the bark of the tree can be removed or girdled and turned into cork. What? So this is native to the Western Mediterranean, so you would not typically find it around here. But here's a sample of its bark. Pretty corky and very light. And here's an example of a tree. We know many of our products are made of wood, but a lot of them are made of other things as well. So not just wood, but wood that's processed in different ways to give us these different housing items. An example of that is plywood as well. And here are these information for that, and putting many sheets together to make plywood. These are called wood veneers, so just take a quick gander at the variety we have. Poplar, tulip poplar. Just look at those grains, patterns, really cool. Lots of different wood types. Finally, that brings me to wood-like substances. These are not made of wood, but they're very tricky because they are really hard. But they're monocots, so that means they cannot produce wood. These are made from bamboo and some bamboo chopsticks. This is a very commonly used plant. It's actually a grass. And here we have a sample of bamboo, pretty large. This can overtake an area very easily as it grows through rhizomes. Wanted to show you quickly the hollow stem of the bamboo. So, yeah, definitely not wood. This is a grass. Palms are a really good example of monocots being really tall, but not being able to produce true wood. You can essentially see the scattered bundles here, so consider this a monocot, and it's a chunk out of a palm tree. This isn't true wood, but it is pretty hard. Sounds like a rock, but it's probably been hardened over time. Cacti also leave behind these skeletons. If you go out west, you can find these. They're very hard as well, and very interesting. There are even woody ferns, and you've likely seen some whether you know it or not. Here is a trunk of one, and that concludes the examples that we have for Lab 8. Thank you.